security. So the conversation in this lecture series largely revolve around issues relevant to the major focus area of the school, that is international relations, national security, and political economy. The lecture series endeavors to bring eminent personalities, including policymakers in the government and opinion influencer from the wider strategic community to provide varied perspective, thereby adding to the existing discourse on the subject. The Confab also acts as a platform for students from different schools and area of specialization to interact with one another, enabling an interdisciplinary inquiry into the research at the university. So far we've had 21 lecture series, and among our speakers, we've had prominent dignitaries such as Professor Herspand, who spoke on non-traditional security, General Khandari, who spoke on comprehensive national security. More recently, we've had Ambassador Pankaj Saran, who talked on Russia and Ukraine war and the key takeaways for India. We also had Ambassador Arun Singh deliver a lecture on India's strategic worldview and emerging partnership. And yesterday we had Hebleker sir, former special secretary, deliver talk on the political and economic crisis in Sri Lanka, challenges on Indian national security. So today we have among us a very dignified personality, Ambassador Talmiz Ahmed, delivering talk on a very pertinent issue, that is Ukraine-Russia war and implication for India's energy security. And although Sir is familiar to some of us and needs no introduction, I would want to go ahead and introduce the speaker briefly, especially for the audience who have joined us online. So to briefly introduce the speaker, Ambassador Talmiz Ahmed joined the Indian Foreign Service in 1974 and has served in a number of West Asian countries such as Kuwait, Iraq, and Yemen. He also held position in the Indian missions in New York, London, and Pretoria. Sir served as the Indian ambassador to Saudi Arabia, Oman, and UAE, and was also additional secretary for international cooperation in the Ministry of Petroleum and Natural Gas and Director General of Indian Council of World Affairs, New Delhi. In July 2011, Ambassador was conferred King Abdul Aziz Medal, first class, by the Saudi government for his contribution on promoting India-Saudi relation. After retirement from foreign service, Ambassador joined the corporate sector in Dubai as president, responsible for business development with the Indo-German joint venture in energy and infrastructure, SICA, and also is an honorary advisory to the Federation of Indian Chambers of Commerce and Industries for the Gulf region. Sir writes and lectures frequently on issues of political Islam, the politics of West Asia, and energy security, and has a number of influential books such as Reforms in the Arab World, External Influence and Regional Debates, Children of Abraham at War, and the Islamist Challenge in West Asia, to his credit. So with this very brief but voluminous introduction, I would, on behalf of the school and the university, would warmly welcome you, sir, and request you to take over. So,
remove the slide. Yeah. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, it's good to have a large audience before me after 9 people who have experienced the full flow of my rhetoric over the last 5 days. We are going to take a look at the Ukraine war, not in great detail. That is not the main focus of my presentation, but the implications of this. But having said that, I should emphasize to you that what we are witnessing today in terms of the war will have reverberations for many years to come. I personally see this conflict as a major effort by the Americans to ensure that the world order, where they have enjoyed hegemony over several years, over several decades after the Second World War, is retained. There has been a sense over the last few years that this order is under threat. Not necessarily because the Americans have reduced in terms of their power and outreach, but because other players have emerged in the global firmament and are seeking a space for themselves in various matters pertaining to global affairs. How this will pan out remains to be seen. And indeed, towards the end, I will raise some questions with you about the various uncertainties that are facing us today and which will determine how it all looks a short while later. We don't know when the war will end. Let us take a look at how it all started. If you see these two maps before you, you will note with a degree of surprise that after the Cold War ended, for the Americans, it appeared as if the Cold War was still on. Russia, that though they declared victory in the Cold War, as far as the Americans were concerned, nothing had changed. Russia remained the formidable opponent it had been for the previous several decades. Why did they feel this? Firstly, a very simple point, the Cold Warriors never went away. In the United States, you have this bunch of people who thrive in conflict. Many of them are affiliated with the weapons system, with the weapons industry. And for weapons industry to continue to be resonant, you need to have the scenario of conflict. Not necessarily actual conflict, though that helps a lot. You should have the prospect of conflict. Many of you will remember that just after the Cold War ended and the Berlin Wall came down, the President of the United States, George Bush Sr., spoke of a new world order. Now those remarks are laughable. He spoke of justice. He spoke of rule of law. He spoke about sensitivity to countries' interests. And some of us might have been naively believing that the Americans actually mean it. He didn't mean any of this. This was going to be a scenario where the United States would be the world's sole hegemonic power. The United States worked out with the Russians an arrangement. The arrangement was to agree to the unification of Germany. The Russians agreed to that. Perhaps Gorbachev thought that this is truly a new world order where we can all work together for world peace. The only condition he put at that time is that portion of East Germany that now joins the mother country, West Germany, it will not be militarized. It will not have weapons directed at Russia. What he did not expect was that there would be a steady expansion of the NATO further eastwards. NATO should have withered away just like the Warsaw Pact did. Which was this enemy they were directing their weapons, they were at that time directing all their attention upon. NATO was a military alliance of Western powers against the Soviet bloc. The Soviet bloc no longer existed, but NATO remained. And we know the importance of NATO. NATO is the organization that assures American hegemony in Europe, because it ensures that this will be the sole power and that the Europeans will remain in playing a support role as far as American hegemony is concerned. There might have been a concern in Washington that the Europeans might actually pluck up their courage and have a modicum of good sense and actually shape a new strategic perspective that would be focused on European interests. But that was not going to happen. That was not acceptable. Because if the Americans lost NATO and the Europeans started developing an independent strategic perspective and presence in world affairs, United States would go back to Fortress America. And its entire hegemony would be across the American continent. The Europeans would then recover their autonomy and shape their strategic and foreign policies based on their interests. And their interests need not necessarily coincide with those of the Americans. That was not acceptable, and which is why NATO remained in place. But then something very curious happened, and that is depicted in the second map. Not only did NATO remain resonant, it started expanding. It started expanding deeper and deeper eastwards, so that Eastern Bloc states, which had been part of the Soviet periphery, now became part of NATO. And this was something that was not accepted. During the last decade of the last century, the Russians had Yeltsin as their president. Today, when you look back, you are only seriously embarrassed by this individual. A serious alcoholic, no personality worth the name, totally incapable of articulating a coherent sentence at any time. The destiny of Russia was in his hands. And he watched without any action the entire crumbling of Russian security. So that all these countries, one by one, became part of the NATO alliance and acquired weaponry directed at Russian targets. Russia that threatened no one at that time at all. Now these had, and the potential for nuclear weapons was very much there. Yeltsin, in a moment of sobriety, as he ended his term, left behind one legacy for the West. On the last day of 1999, he told the Americans, "My successor is Putin." That changed the scenario. The kind of free ride the Americans had had for 10 years now came to a halt, or at least had to be reconsidered, and you had to move forward cautiously. Putin is deeply concerned about, firstly, he's deeply steeped in Russian history. He believes that Russia is a significant role player in world affairs. He sees the bargains that were done by Gorbachev and later on the sacrifices that were made by Yeltsin as demeaning to Russian heritage. And it is in this background that he saw his mission as recovering what Russia had lost and reaffirming a fresh Russian presence and role in regional and world affairs. And this is where you now see what is happening. The Americans continued to pressurize Russia. And they finally thought about Ukraine. Ukraine, as we saw in the previous map, shares a long border with Russia. It has also a strategic presence all across the Black Sea, and therefore has value for NATO that is both terrestrial and maritime. This is where the line was drawn. But the Americans never gave up. And now you see this whole year that has passed, the Americans have had an up and down movement. They started, Biden in his early period started engaging with the Russians. He had a summit in July 2021. He had a summit with Putin in Geneva. At the end of the summit, he stated in a press conference that it had been an extremely important encounter, that they had agreed to work together to promote stability in the region, that he understood Putin's concerns relating to Ukraine, and therefore there was a very clear signal that these were two powers based on mutual respect, they would work together. for regional and world stability and peace. We all believed it. Possibly even the Americans did. But what happened after that? There was a very steady engagement. All this period, July up to November, you had a very steady engagement. Various American officials would go to Moscow, and there was no hint to us in the public domain that anything was actually changing. And then it changed in November. And one has to ask oneself, what happened? Why did the United States, which had talked about stability, engagement, sensitivity, etc., have this change of heart and overnight become aggressive and confrontational as far as Russia is concerned? We can speculate. We can speculate because by that time, with Biden having completed about a year in office, the pathetic character of the presidency was apparent to all. That all of us who had thought that there would be a real change in the United States after the anarchy and chaos of Donald Trump now realize that we are in trouble. This is a guy who doesn't know where he is and is not going anywhere. Look at the crowning blow was Kabul. 15th August 1947, an absolute fiasco, the kind of which even today you cannot understand. What was it that drove this president? He had a deadline, self-appointed deadline of 11th September, the very date on which, because of which the United States had embarked on this 20-year mission in Afghanistan. They had to withdraw in defeat as they had done in Vietnam, but in this way, why was it necessary to withdraw in the month of July? They had still control over Kabul. They still had control over Kabul airport. They still had American citizens who needed to be evacuated. They still had Afghans who needed to be evacuated. None of that mattered to the president. He just packed his bags and ran as hard as he could. A very severe embarrassment. And that, I think, more or less ended any hope that we were going to have a sensible presidency in the White House. But then something else also, I think, was in play. And that is the arms lobby. The arms lobby realized with deep concern that if Biden had his way and he engaged with Putin and was able to have a modicum of stability in the European continent, and there was a broad understanding about each other's red lines, what about us? Who do we sell weapons to? What about all those billions of dollars that need to flow in? My personal view is that Biden at that stage had already reached Nadir, but the arms lobby felt deep concern. They are the ones who operated on the president. Well, as you remember, the arms lobby has bipartisan support in the United States. It is the most crucial element determining the way the United States shapes foreign policy. And that is what happened. And there was another horrifying scenario before the US president. He might become a lame duck in a year's time. In November 2022, you're going to have midterm elections. Every indication at that time and since is that the president might lose the Congress and could even lose the Senate. That's the surest way of becoming a lame duck president. And the surest way of preparing the ground for a real change in the White House 2 years later. It therefore became necessary. These are the three factors, to my mind, that Biden was finally persuaded that this is not the time to engage with the Russians amicably. This is not the time to talk about accommodation and understanding of each other's red lines. this is the time to show the mailed fist of the United States. Because what Biden had been talking about, let's engage with the Russians and then use diplomacy to disengage Russia from the Chinese and focus our attention on how to manage China. The Cold Warriors have a very different scenario. For them, the enemy, the permanent enemy is Russia. China is the one they will hope to manage as they did during the Cold War. So it is this mindset that triumphs finally in the United States thinking, and that is why you had to have this, this confrontation with Ukraine. But let's go back a little bit, and that is how did we reach this deal? Putin comes in the year 2000. It's already, you can see that these color revolutions are emerging. Regime change, very obviously engineered from the United States, taking place in different places in Eastern Europe. Regime change. And then in 2008, Ukraine and Georgia indicate that they would like to join NATO. Europe is very reluctant about this. Europe actually lives next door to the Russians. And if there is any fallout of these policies, they are the first to be affected by those. So they didn't want any of this. They saw no advantage to themselves. Finally, it was agreed that while there would be no formal offer of membership to NATO to Ukraine and Georgia, the membership would remain open. And it is in this way that you find the Russians now deeply concerned about the last stretch as far as the NATO was concerned. Putin made his position very clear at the Munich Security Conference. He stated that this was not acceptable and that Russia would give a very strong response to any such event. You had then engineering of domestic, a very obviously managed domestic crisis in Ukraine, where you had various people coming to the streets and criticizing their president. The president had said that he would not sign an agreement to promote ties with the European Union. He would, in fact, build up relations with Russia and with the Eurasian Economic Union instead. And that is when you had all those, a lot of, which is known as the Euromaidan in the movement. And there was a lot of crisis. The president had to leave and he fled. It then gets a little murky. Who did what, to whom, when, how, why. Be that as it may, as far as the Russians are concerned, they sent the troops and occupied Crimea. They reminded anyone who wished to know that Crimea had been given to the Ukrainians in a set of circumstances. Those circumstances had changed. The Russian Navy still remained in Crimea, and there now it would be Russian territory as well. The conflict of 2014 ended with the Minsk Accords. The Minsk Accords looked very positive. There were concerns relating to the future of the Russian majority communities in the east of Ukraine, which is what had ignited all these troubles. But we know neither side paid much attention to Minsk, and you had a further deterioration in the scenario. I won't burden you with what happened when. The main point is on 24th February, Russia intervened militarily in Ukraine, and that war is still ongoing. The United States and the European Union imposed very substantial sanctions on Russia. The decision that appears to have been taken is not to involve troops, not to involve European or American troops in Ukraine. Let the Ukrainians fight, but give them the weaponry that would enable them to give a good fight. So there is a massive movement of arms worth billions and billions of dollars into Ukraine. That is where I see the hand of the arms lobby, because that is what they wanted, and that is what is actually happening. Not only is it going to the Ukrainians, large number of other Europeans have started wanting weapons as well. So everybody is very happy about that. Now, but there is something to be noted, a small subtext, which is not being paid any attention to. The Germans have crawled out from under the rock and have asserted that they are going to rearm. And already a budget of 100 billion euros has been set aside. In any other set of circumstances, rearmament of Germany would have been headline news. And there would have been numerous articles discussing the implications of this. I don't think too many of us have seen any serious analysis of the implications of what is happening. Japan in the East has also declared it will now develop its defense capabilities. Also a few $billion as well. Again, it will rearm. And many of us who recall our history of the 1930s will remember that the rearmament of Germany and the defense expansion of Japan finally culminated in the Second World War. So be it. As far as the Americans are concerned, their agenda is not concerned about Germany or Japan or what happened there. It is number one, keep pressure on the Russians and hope against hope that the Democrats do reasonably well in the November elections. I assert several times to audiences in different places that United States is run by its domestic politics. It has elections every 2 years and a presidential election every 4 years. And that is what drives everything that happens. It is all-consuming obsession. And then, of course, linked with this is the American interest. The American interest is based on the arms lobby, its financial interest from Wall Street, and now its technological interest. These are the drivers, and these are the ones that have driven the United States to this posture that we find today. So lots of weapons for the Ukrainians. So as the Americans have done in the past, you're going to see that all over again, fight for freedom to the last Ukrainian. The Ukrainians didn't buy all that. Many of you will remember that within a few weeks of the invasion, already the Ukrainians were talking to the Russians. You had several rounds of discussions. The last round was in the end of March in Istanbul. And it appeared from public reports that a lot of ground had been covered. It appeared as if we could now move on. And that is where it would end. The exact details are not known. It would have been a ceasefire. And then they would have negotiated with the help of various players. They would have negotiated certain broad terms and conditions. But that was not acceptable to the United States. Then its whole agenda would have broken away. It would have had no electoral implications. It would have had no positive implications as far as the arms lobby is concerned. And because of it, the United States made it very clear that a ceasefire was not acceptable. And the person who carried this message to Mr. Zelensky was none other than one of the world's greatest statesmen, Boris Johnson. Boris Johnson arrived in Ukraine and told Zelensky that a ceasefire is not acceptable and the West will not back you in the post-war situation. After that, the man went away and hopefully he has gone into the dustbin of history. But you never know, people re-emerge from these dustbins and come back and have another day. Donald Trump is knocking on the dustbin as he is doing so already. Now, these sanctions, this is a fascinating aspect. On 8th March, the United States unilaterally announced sanctions on Russian energy supplies. No consultation with the Europeans. The American dependence on Russian supplies is negligible. It is the Europeans who depend crucially on these energy supplies. So if you were to look at some figures that I pulled out here and there, natural gas dependence on Russia 40%, coal dependence 46%, oil dependence 25%. Overnight, Europe was on its knees. It was paying the price for the NATO expansion. Its dreams of having an independent strategic policy, its dreams of now shaping a foreign policy approach that would truly safeguard European interests had withered away. And now they are lapdogs of the Americans looking out to see how they can save themselves from the disaster that is right before them. Their own reports are talking about a recession in Europe. It's a serious disaster zone as far as they are concerned. European crisis. You can see the summary of this. There is gas shortage, obviously. So they have put could you put that back? Yeah. The Europeans are experiencing very severe gas shortage. They are looking out for the forthcoming winter. The shortage of gas will affect every individual in Europe because not only is there shortage of this fuel, there is also a very severe hike in prices. And that is there has been a rush to find alternative supplies. And you have seen European leaders going to various capitals. The German chancellor showed up in Qatar and had to be told frankly that there is no gas that the Qataris have. Yes, a few years later, they're going to have a lot of gas and they would love to supply it to the Germans, but the Germans need that now. Then they have engaged with Japan and Korea, who buy Qatari gas and are pleading with their allies, please, please, please cut down on your requirement and share some of that with us. Pathetic state. And this is what the Russians did. They said, the European sanctions said that they will put sanctions only on seaborne trade. The Russians were not born yesterday. They've cut the pipeline. So they say it's for repairs, urgently required repairs. So Nord Stream 1, because they had closed Nord Stream 2 earlier, they have closed Nord Stream 1 now. There is no gas available, and whatever is there, global prices have shot up several times. And when this gas prices shoot up and you are facing an economic crisis, you have serious problems at home. In the case of Germany, which is looking at a negative growth rate, you can't do the industrial production, which is the backbone of your economy and which will sustain you in these difficult times. You are looking, because the continent is so deeply engaged with Russia, this abrupt cutting off of ties engineered from Washington is very difficult to manage. It is not something that you can switch off. You have not only energy related ties with Russia. Russia is a global supplier of food and fertilizer. It is also a global supplier of precious metals and rare earths, as well as gold. So we have, at some stage, you might sort these things out, but just for now, it's going to prove very difficult. What the Europeans are doing is rhetoric. coming up with extraordinarily fancy plans that we are now going to accelerate energy transition. That what we would have done in a shorter, we will do it in a shorter period, and all of these figures are going to show that we are moving away. None of them has any relation with reality, and nobody believes that any of this is going to happen. So, but you have, of course, in times of crisis, statesmen or statespersons have to show that they are doing a lot of thinking and a lot of work on behalf of their ordinary people. But what we have to look at, there are two things which the Europeans are touting. Number one, European unity is holding on. It is not. There are serious questions being raised in inner councils about the efficacy of these policies. Some of the former East European partners have raised very serious questions about the impact on their own economies. And I'm going to say to you, this European unity business is not going to hold as robustly as we think. The second is the impact on the domestic situation. As the economy deteriorates and you are faced with inflation and job losses, you are going to see people seeking alternatives. It is in these times of crisis that you find populist leaders emerge. Italy has already shown the way. Hungary has already got planted a very robust populist system, celebrating its Catholic traditions. We could see a lot of domestic unrest and populism. Populism has one serious problem for all of us. It thrives on slogans and rhetoric, but it comes within a short period. It is rarely able to actually deliver the El Dorado that they have promised. But the fact remains that they are the first winners in a democratic system when you have a sense of crisis. In the meantime, what the Americans have done is to suddenly discover their relations with West Asia. This is the same Joe Biden who during the election campaign had called Saudi Arabia a pariah state and had said, I am going to ensure that they remain outside the faith. He had also used some harsh language against the crown prince of Saudi Arabia and said, I'm not going to talk to him. Like a childhood play yard, the American president said, मैं उससे बात नहीं करूंगा. And that the Saudis said very little. Except in the month of July, this guy showed up in Riyadh and said, I want to talk to you because I need you. You're certainly a good boy. And I really like your looks. Nothing about that pariah state. What happened to that pariah state? He is pleading with them to increase production so that oil prices go down and he wins the November election. And the Saudis said, bugger off. And that's what happened. He did. And then he announced, I have talked to the crown prince and some things will happen in a few weeks. The hint to the American media was that the Saudis, not being the brightest people in the world, are going to massively increase production so that the prices come down and Biden looks good. None of that happened. Once again, he underestimated his interlocutor. The Saudis worked with OPEC Plus to reduce production by 2 million barrels a day because prices had gone down. The world did not need so much oil. It went down and they could afford that. They depend on this oil. They don't have any other source to sustain themselves. If you were the leader of Saudi Arabia, however much you may love the Americans, are you responsible for the welfare of your own people or the welfare of the American people? I think the answer that has emerged from Riyadh after a long time, for far too long, West Asia supported American agenda in West Asia, even if it hurt their own interests. And I'm going to say to you, the region has come of age and is now taking decisions in its own interest. And what are you hearing from Washington, D.C. today? Howls of anger, howls of protest. We must hurt the Saudis, snap our ties. Never trusted them anyway, never liked them. And now you have, this is the record. Only a few sane voices emerge. You say, look, the Saudis have to look after Saudi interests. Americans look after American interests, but Saudis can't look after American interests. Saudis have to look after their own interests. So the oil prices are now going up, and you are likely to see a scenario where these prices will remain around $90, 90, 92. They go up and down a little bit. What is still holding them, the demand manageable as of now, is China is not yet opening up. They still have the policy of the COVID lockdown and zero tolerance of COVID, and therefore China has not yet emerged as a normal role player in the global economy. When they do, there will be a change in the situation, but not till then. What about us? We are deeply hurt by these high oil prices. These prices have gone down, have gone up, and look at the impact on our imports. That at the time in 2019, 2020, we could buy 270 million tons for $119 billion. A year later, in the context of the pandemic and the slowdown of economic crisis, we bought much less, but the bill was even lower. But now, as we saw a degree of opening up, we bought 60 million tons less at a price which is almost the same as a short while ago. We have, of course, made an effort to diversify our sources. It doesn't help with prices, but it gives you a modicum of security, a sense of security. But even then, the Gulf countries provide us with 60% of our requirements. The Americans were happy with us because they supplied a lot, but now they are deeply unhappy with us because we are buying from Russia. And that's what we should do. If the Russians give us a discount of whatever dollars it is good for us, good for our country. And we have made it very clear that we are going to buy from wherever we need. And that has been a great help for us. And for a short period in June, Russia became the second largest supplier to India in that month. Not much difference as far as the pump is concerned, because the pump prices have very little to do with what's happening in the rest of the world. They don't go up and down like the DNS allowance. They remain more or less steady. They are connected with taxes. As we know, that the price, the more than half the price at the petrol pump is due to taxes, state and central taxes, and they are a very huge chunk in the national budget. No government is going to reduce these prices without hurting itself, particularly when we have such a negative scenario facing us at present. I just saw before coming here, there's a short report in the India Today talking about the outlook, saying that the outlook for growth has been trimmed further, that inflation is looming large, important items in the daily budget have gone up in terms of prices, and the growth rate that we were looking forward to has also had to come down a little bit. So obviously, this is going to have a certain impact on us over this year and the next year. And at the same time, this talk of green transition that had been so robustly discussed, we've of course protected ourselves by pointing out that we will have zero emissions in 2070. Nicely, 50 years hence. So our grandchildren will celebrate that moment, or not, as the case may be. But that is, I don't think it's going anywhere. Green has always been a lot of rhetoric in our setup, lot of drum beats. It is the right things to say, but you really can't do much about it. And frankly, not much has happened. Very quickly about India. India is coal dependent. In our uh, in our energy mix, coal is the dominant place, has remained dominant, and as I will show you within a minute, it will continue to remain dominant for the foreseeable future. Oil, gas, very small, 9-10%, not really changing very much. I do know all about these challenges. I won't talk about this. You are familiar with what is our situation. We had in June 2017 a document released by the NITI Aayog. It's a draft energy policy document. The word draft remains because it was not finally approved by the government. No explanation has been provided. But this is the last government document available on the internet, a fairly substantial document that gives you certain projections relating to India's energy output. This is because it's the only one that I have. I'm sharing it with you. Though obviously, it is now 5 years old, but it's the only one we have. It's a product of tremendous study by some of our best minds over a period of time. Achhe din dur mein. That is linked with that draft. This is what came out in the report. That the projections were till 2040. 2040, they said, business as usual, an ambitious scenario. So renewables in the best scenario would reach in the ambitious 13%, but otherwise 9%. Coal, 2012 or even 2022, 50%. In the best case scenario, 44%, otherwise in business as usual, the same, 50%. Oil, 27% in 2012, 25% in 2022, almost the same, even in the ambitious scenario. Gas, not much change, 8% or 8.5%, 9.4%. Others, loose remark, biogas or something, almost. It changes from 15% to 7%. So the shift in favor of renewables is really from others. Let us see. Import dependence. No change. In the next 40 years, next 20 years, no change at all. I've given these figures. What we need, as said in the report, and what is expected to be domestic production, as said in the report. So this is available. You saw oil required, import dependence, say oil. Dependence 2022, 83%. In the ambitious scenario, in 2040, 86%. Gas, the same. It's not going to change here. This ambitious one will show very high, the import dependence, 57%. Here is shown as 27 or 20%, so it's not clear where it's going to come from. Analysis of the supply scenario. As I said, renewables is really picking up from the others. As far as oil and gas are concerned, there's hardly any change that anybody can see. Import dependence, hardly any change that anybody can see. With all the efforts I pointed out over here, India will remain import dependent with hardly any difference in the present and scenarios in 2040. Oil imports 81 to 90%, coal import 15. This 51% is depending on which scenario you follow, but 26% is what is put in the ambitious projection. Gas imports remain 20%. Therefore, what you need, energy diplomacy. This is put down in the report itself. So I have taken verbatim from the report. This is energy diplomacy. All the things that they have put down were precisely those that were part of energy diplomacy when I was in the Petroleum Ministry from 2004 to 2006. Nothing has changed. And that is why you find, get the latest technology. This is the one, horizontal fracking, horizontal, where you go down and then, horizontal exploration, technology. Energy supplies through pipeline. They've also that, lead role. All of this is what has been standard energy diplomacy, no change at all. What should we do about it? We should produce more. For the last 22 years, every government in Delhi has said we should produce more domestically, except they haven't found it. With all the efforts that we have gone through, there is no, in fact, the last figures show there is a significant decline in domestic production. No long-term supply, diversify, nothing new. I found this fascinating. Pursue transnational pipelines. These two pipelines, the Iran-Pakistan-India pipeline and the Turkmenistan-Afghanistan-Pakistan-India pipeline, mentioned in the report, both of them traverse through our special friend, Pakistan, which is why they have not gone anywhere. And here in 2017, I'm astonished to see these projects that we pursued so vigorously and finally had to give up due to politics. In the case of IPI, domestic politics in Pakistan, not connected with the bilateral, we had several rounds of discussion on the IPI. We truly believed at that time that Iran will be in a position to meet India's overwhelming gas requirements as fuel for our power projects and our industrial requirements for all of Northeast India, from Kashmir, Punjab, Kerala, Western UP, Rajasthan, and parts of Gujarat. Huge, because the quantum was substantial. We reached very far in our negotiations with the Pakistanis and the Iranians. We agreed on a price at the Pak-Iran border. The only negotiations that we were having at that time with Pakistan was about the additional price that should be paid for the security arrangements for the portion where the gas traverses through Pakistan. That was it. And it would have been very easily what the Pakistanis proposed would have added $1, and what we proposed would have added 25 cents. And if we had gone on, I think we would have agreed somewhere in between. But it didn't happen. The Americans straight away said that, oh, it is due to our pressure. We were opposed to the project because we don't want anything to happen as far as Iran is concerned. But it had nothing to do with the Americans. It had all to do with the situation in Pakistan. We noticed that Musharraf, who was a very important partner in the success of this project, and whom my minister had met when we went to Pakistan for negotiations, at that time he started losing his grip on domestic politics. He ordered the attack on Lal Masjid in 2007. 2007. He also had the Chief Justice issue. The Americans saw that he needed more credibility. They asked him to work with Benazir Bhutto, and marriage made in hell. And as a result, she came back and was assassinated. And then, of course, in 2008, you had the assault upon Mumbai. That has ensured that we would not cooperate with Pakistan on any serious matter at all. So this is the background for the end of the IPI. And I, who used to push this project so robustly in petroleum, I now no longer believe that transnational pipelines are feasible and that we must opt for LNG projects rather than pipeline projects. And here in this report, there is a reference to IPI and TAPI. TAPI is the pipeline that comes from Turkmenistan, but it has a double jeopardy because it goes through Afghanistan as well as Pakistan. So not only do I have issues with Pakistan, I must have security in Afghanistan for us to construct this project. As you know, a pipeline project needs to be buried underground. And it's a lot of effort. And the pipeline goes through those territories, which in that period was Taliban territory, all around the south, Kandahar, etc. And therefore, there was no way we are going to send workers to construct this a very important project. I don't think there is any life in these two projects. I think they are passé. We have to look at gas, which has to come from, it has to come from LNG. This was another fascinating thing. Set up policy coordination with the MEA, Ministry of External Affairs. When I was in petroleum, I was sent from the MEA, possibly the first. I was called energy diplomat. I was the first man from MEA to bring a diplomatic value to our engagements relating to energy security. Because that's what we had to do. Any engagement with a foreign partner involves diplomacy. And diplomacy is done by diplomats. And that's why I was placed there. The IAS colleagues of mine hated the idea, absolutely hated the idea that a foreign service officer should come into their domain. And once Mani Shankar ceased to be the petroleum minister, they made it very clear to me that I was the least attractive and the most unwanted person in the ministry. So I was delighted to see this complete absence of any connection with reality. You have these two, these two recommendations for energy diplomacy in this distinguished report. Let's take a relaxed look. Where do we go from here? There are many uncertainties. Demand from India, we've seen the figures. If we had normal situation post-pandemic, post-Ukraine, we know that we really need a lot of this oil, and most of it is going to come from foreign sources. But it is the supply that should agitate us. We are today dependent on West Asia for 60%. If you add Iraq and Iran now has come down, it can even go up to 75 and even 80%. Most of our public sector buy on the basis of long-term contracts. We have started buying some oil on the spot market, perhaps increasing slightly, which gives us some price advantages, some benefits. But by and large, our government companies buy on long-term contracts, and therefore, Indian Oil and Oil India, etc., they do long-term contracts. There is very little doubt that whatever happens in the world, West Asia will remain central as far as India's interests are concerned, and indeed global interests. I've given you a quotation from a year before the pandemic from the International Energy Agency, and it's a verbatim quote. Whichever pathway the energy system follows, the world still relies heavily on oil supplies from the Middle East. The region remains by far the largest net provider of oil to world markets, as well as an important exporter of LNG. Given the sanctions on the Iranians, given the sanction on the Russians, all the more we have to look at this situation. It also therefore means that oil supplies also require the security and stability of West Asia so that they can move well. And this is the important point, that most of West Asian oil is today coming to Asia. It's coming primarily to China, India, and Japan and Korea. This is where now we have certain areas of uncertainty. We have looked at the politics of the Ukraine war. We have looked at the impact of sanctions. We have seen how Europe is reeling from these heavy blows upon them. We have seen, just in passing, the possible rise of Germany and Japan over a longer period. And we have had a quick glimpse over what it all means for India. So where do we go from here? We don't know. And these are some of the questions that occurred to me as I was preparing this presentation. There could be some other questions which could emerge from your side. The first question I asked myself, that the outlook has to depend on when the war ends and on how it ends. What are the terms and conditions on which it ends? Could we have a situation as the present escalation has shown? The Russians are today, having had this attack on Crimea, the bridge that links the mainland with Crimea, and having annexed those provinces in the east, Russian majority provinces. Russia has retaliated with massive bombing all across Ukraine, which have caused very severe damage. Zelensky obviously has asked for more weapons, but Russia has said that they are willing to negotiate terms of ceasefire. Could this be that situation? That this could be the one where you could move forward? Or could it be a further escalation? Zelensky encouraged, egged on, pushed for by all these well-wishers behind him who are hoping that freedom triumphs when the last Ukrainian has been buried. We don't know. We will see. What is it like in Ukraine? We know very little. The management of news is so robust. This is an extraordinary lesson for those of us who follow media. The near total control over mainstream media globally. It is extraordinary. You hardly ever find an article which gives you a view slightly different from the American view or the European. Very rare. Hardly ever. An objective analysis, the word objective is now absent. And it has also penetrated India, because this is the golden opportunity for the pro-US lobby in our country. They have got a new life. They have been working so hard over the last few years that this is the time to swing India towards the Americans. They never give up. And therefore, they were very upset when we bought the Russian oil. And now they feel that, oh, the message that they are giving is, of course, fed to them from Washington is this. The Russians, as a result of this war, are weak. They are more dependent on China. And because of this, they will be less able to influence China and indeed will be supporting the Chinese agenda. In this horrible scenario, dangerous scenario for India, horror upon horror, should we not shift to the Americans and just somehow secure ourselves from these two monsters above us in the north? Question. What is the American supposed to do with regard to our confrontation with China over the last 2 years and more? Is the American what is he supposed to do? And what can he do? What I see as far as China is concerned, that we have 1,500 kilometers of undemarcated border. They are not going anywhere and we are not going anywhere. Priority for US, for Indian diplomacy, the priority for Indian democracy, for Indian diplomacy is the management of relations with China. Not fooling around supporting the American agenda in the South China Sea and the West Pacific region. That is not our war. We have problems right here. And therefore, this is where we have to be. The other situation, where is NATO and what is happening with, these are again uncertain. Will NATO remain a resilient force? And what will be the situation in the European Union? Does the European Union have staying power? Can we see beyond the rhetoric coming from Brussels that there is a questioning of which way? As of now, there appears to be a consensus. But can this consensus break? If so, which is the weak link in that chain? Already Hungary has shown its dissatisfaction with certain policies. When there was to be a total embargo on Russian gas, it is Hungary that insisted that it should be only on seaborne trade. The Germans depend even now on a pipeline gas, though it's not coming or it's coming sporadically. The Germans have no LNG terminal. To construct an LNG terminal costs a lot of money and takes a long time. They say, oh, so and so gas will come somewhere else. This is all loose talk. Nobody knows. Yes. How resilient is the Sino-Russian alliance? As of now, it appears to be very, very substantial because both have been demonized for a fairly long time by the Americans, and they see little advantage in separating themselves from each other. They have worked together for a fairly long time. I remind you here that they're expanded separately and jointly their ties in across Eurasia, Central Asia, Pakistan, Afghanistan, Iran, Turkey. This is their space. They have made a major outreach to West Asia. Saudi Arabia has made it very clear that they would like to work with Russia beyond OPEC+. This is the coming of age of that country. The Saudis have already had 5 rounds of dialogue with the Saudis. There has been an engagement between Turkey and UAE, Saudi Arabia, and Egypt. So this region is churning very substantially. And we do not know as yet, beyond these engagements, whether there is any shape that has emerged. Not likely just yet. My own view was that earlier, as far as Biden is concerned, we were waiting to see how effective he will be. We found he is not effective. We were then waiting for the November elections. It's not relevant very much now. We are waiting for how the Ukraine war shapes up and shapes the regional scenario. So all of these are uncertainties. In this situation, I personally see no reason for either Moscow or Beijing to have any differences. It is said there is a lot of literature from the Western side, much of it of dubious value, wishful thinking. Oh, the Chinese are very unhappy with the war. Oh, the Chinese. Of course, nobody wished for a war. But why don't the Western writers ask this question? Why did we provoke the Russians? We had recognized their red lines in July 2021. And then suddenly in November, the president ceased to recognize them as red lines. He used the word, I recognize Russia's red lines in Ukraine. Exact words. And then you say that, so that should be the focus of attention. The focus of attention to my mind should be, what is the United States looking forward to in terms of its own long-term strategic interests? We shall see. Yes, domestic politics. Domestic politics in the United States, we already know. There is some wishful thinking about domestic politics of Russia transforming itself. I don't know. But they say, if you remember, coup d'etat in Moscow. Generals unhappy. They're unhappy with the conduct of the war. Assassination attempts on Putin. Survived the 5th assassination attempt. You must be having a blind, deaf, and dumb assassin. In 5 times you try to kill the president and you fail. So this is all misinformation. We still don't have authentic information. I'm not sure that Putin is looking feeble or is going anywhere. He's going to be around. We don't have to like him. The Americans dislike him. They would have loved to have another Yeltsin, a drunken sod in Moscow, but they have got Putin, and I'm not sure he's going anywhere. Also, we have to look at West Asia. There is a tremendous pressure on West Asia to beef up production in order to stabilize prices. I think that, yes, they would like to do that, but the global economy doesn't warrant it just yet. Also, and this is something I must emphasize to you, there is that spare capacity. The Saudis point out, and that is a point we missed very many times. They said that from 2014, you have been singing the song of climate change, and you have reduced investments as far as new development and production of oil is concerned. That we used to invest $700 billion a month on new discoveries and new development. It now has become $400 billion last year, now $300 billion. There is an acute shortage of spare capacity even as I speak to you. So if the Chinese were to enter the market in a short while, you're going to have the prices shooting up well beyond $100 and going into $120 because that thing is simply not there. This West Asia is also prone to uncertainty and instability. But the kind of crisis scenario that we had during Donald Trump's period, when he was deliberately provoking war against Iran, I think has abated. Israel also has not been as obnoxious and provocative as it has been from time to time, seeking to irritate for domestic reasons, domestic election reasons, to show what a macho nation it is. But I do not think, I feel that as of now, as I'm speaking to you, West Asia looks far more stable than it has for a long time. A far greater degree of self-confidence is apparent among the various leaders than it was then. Of course, this is, as I say to you, tomorrow something dreadful may happen, but I live with that. As I think I'm going to say to you, this is what I see as of now. Could we have a nuclear agreement with Iran? I think most of the elements of the nuclear agreement have been settled. I think many of the things that were irritants towards the end, I think have been more or less ironed out. But Biden could not have, he could not have an agreement before the November election because that agreement would have been the principal issue during the end. Any agreement that you have with Iran is going to be picked up by the right wing who are going to say, oh, you supped with the devil. Oh, you gave away this, you gave away that, you sacrificed. The Iranians are monsters. They are the evil. Therefore, I think he will see the result and will have an agreement later. From the Iranian side, I think they are more or less reconciled to a 2-year agreement. That Trump or someone very like him, a possible clone, possible Trump himself recloned, is likely to be in the White House. And the first thing he's going to do is to rubbish this GCPOA. So the Iranians are working not so much on reviving the GCPOA as in looking at alternative scenarios beyond the GCPOA. And many of you would have already noticed engagement with China and Russia is central to this. They have made several attempts also to engage with India. But India is very ambivalent in terms of what it can and should offer. We never give up on Chabahar, but we don't do anything about it. So that is Indian policy. I think the Iranians are now understood that, not giving up on India, recognize that India's priorities now are overwhelmingly domestic, and therefore let's get on with it and have serious foreign policy engagements with the others in the region. But I want to be provocative here. And I said this in an interview where a European Union chap was sitting with me. I said, look at the map, you guys. You talk about Russia and supplies drying up from Russia. Just look slightly lower down. There's a country there called Iran, which you pretend doesn't exist. Iran has the world's second largest gas reserves and the third largest oil reserves. All your energy needs can be met by that country. Is your interest more important at home? Or is it your subordination to the American agenda? You don't have any quarrel with the Iranians. The Americans have quarrels and they are overwhelmingly domestic. So can you pluck up the courage, or more than courage, good sense, to engage with these people? Solve all your issues. He remains to be seen. So this is, my contribution is provocative. No sign of that happening just yet. And finally, state of the global economy. Everything depends on this. The outlook for this year and next year from all sources is extremely negative. I got a piece of paper just before coming and I wrote down some figures and I thought I'll share them with you. Global growth this year, 3%. Next year, 2.7%. US growth, 1%. European Union, 0.5%. Germany, minus 0.3%. Italy, minus 0.2%. China, 4.4%. 4.4% with the lockdown. So this is the situation. This is the reality. These are figures from their sources. The situation doesn't look good at all. Can the Europeans and indeed the international community depend? Can it simply give up on its interests because it doesn't suit Biden's electoral interests or long-term interests of its arms lobby? For me, that is the debate. That is the crucial issue. This is what we need to answer. For me, this world order demands a review. If the Americans have encouraged the Ukraine war in order to maintain the global status quo and retain their hegemony, I think that is what needs to be challenged. Not necessarily by building up a new Cold War, as the American literature seems to suggest, but a series of role players, major players, middle powers, etc., each of them asserting a presence in the global order and suggesting a certain role that they would want to assert in that order. This is, to my mind, you can put any word you wish, a multipolar order. That is the order we are looking for. India fits in perfectly in that order. We don't want alignments, we don't want alliances, but we need that order, multipolar. Put any word you want, plural, less of this. And the last point now, ladies and gentlemen. This transition called green transition is not free of charge. It's not that one day you dream and say, oh, I want to be a good boy and I'm going to shift from fossil fuels and go into green energy. It costs a lot of money. And I have got this figure. For the next 30 years, $275 trillion is required to fund the transition. These are figures I don't even know what a trillion is. Sounds pretty big to me. This is the figure that you have to put down. Does the international community have this kind of money? So what we are left with is that we need to work together. Conventional energy and green energy. You cannot have either or. And these figures that you put down, 2050, 2040, 2050, 2030, they are meaningless because the will is not there. A democratic leader is focused on the next election. And that is what matters to him or her. He doesn't have time to think beautiful thoughts for the 2 generations later. He has to give energy to people right here. He has to give economic development to people right in front of him. Where are the resources for him to fund both green transition and the support for the national economy? It's not going to happen. And therefore, as far as I can see, where India is concerned, the economic challenges are so substantial, so overwhelming, that we are going to have a very hard time ahead of us. Every day we will lurch from one challenge to another, but I don't see green transition figuring anywhere seriously in this. India's role should be manage relations with China, ensure that we work with our neighborhood. For me, the best platforms are not an embrace with the Americans, which is the most idiotic suggestion to come from various parties in Delhi. It is to focus on Russia, India, China platform, BRICS, SCO, Indian Ocean Rim Organization, and a far greater engagement with this territory called Eurasia and the Indian Ocean.
Thank you so much, sir, for the very extensive and in-depth analysis of the issue that has been haunting us, almost everyone in the globe today. And I can only imagine how interesting it must have been for all those who attended physically. And so I'm sure the talk has triggered a lot of questions and opinions. So without taking much time, I would like to open the session for questions and deliberation. So questions can be asked directly or it can be dropped in the chat box. And I would like to request my colleague Devender to please moderate the questions since we are doing this in a hybrid mode. So the questions that would come online would be moderated by me, and the questions that is to be asked by the audience present there in the classroom will be moderated by him.
Any of you have questions?
We'll take about 3 or 4, and then I'll respond to those, and then we can. Because if we start answering one, half an hour will pass.
Okay.
So those who want to ask a question online can please raise their hand or drop in the chat box.
So till now, the entire transactions, currency transactions for energy and oil have been with dollars. So the petrodollar came about. Now, one of the fallouts of the Ukrainian conflict is that the dollar will lose its relevance and we will see the rise of the renminbi. One, what will be the effect of this on the Indian security concern? And two, will we inadvertently be strengthening the Chinese economy because our energy concerns are paramount and the requirement is humongous. So what will be the fallout of this shift from the petrodollar to the renminbi? Thank you.
Good evening, a couple of questions. Firstly, as you have discussed, energy transition in Europe is in jeopardy. I'm curious to know the energy transition in oil exporting countries as you have extensively worked in West Asia in your illustrious career. UAE has successfully transitioned from being an oil-dependent economy of close to 50% GDP to right now it's 9% GDP. So why aren't these oil exporting companies why aren't they transitioning from a depletable resource-based economy to a capital-based economy? That is my first question. So renewable capital-based economy, from a depletable resource-based economy to a renewable capital-based economy. Because as you know, there's a famous saying in Saudi: "My father rode a camel, I drive a car. My son will fly a jet airplane, and his son will again ride a camel." So they knew that it's a depletable resource, oil. But why aren't they willing to transition from a depletable oil resource-based economy to that? That was my first question. And secondly, sir, as you also spoke of in purchasing power parity terms, Indians are paying the highest tariffs for the energy. So why is India transitioning? I mean, why is India implementing this relative pricing mechanism? And will this resentment among the civilians spiral into a security threat for the infrastructure also, energy infrastructure?
Security threat
For the energy infrastructure, will they
because of high prices.
high prices, resentment against the high tariffs?
I'm not sure I understood the link between. What is the link to this?
No, sir.
High prices at the petrol pump.
And the energy infrastructure security, because we talk of energy infrastructure security also, and will the resentment will it lead to any national security, civil unrest and kind of that? That was my second question.
Okay. Yeah. Let's take 2 more. Is there someone from here?
So, Russia was imposed with these sanctions due to this Ukraine conflict, and still we purchased oil from Russia. And sanctions were there, but still we get it to our national interest. But Iran was the second largest supplier of oil to India once before 2019. So we stopped it. But why is the contrasting attitude of ours? Why we purchased from Russia and not Iran? Thanks.
Shadaman, is there any question?
No, Devender, not as of now.
Okay. The point is very taken about the dollar. I think it is still very, very marginal. The transactions in the non-dollar transactions are a very, very small percentage and are a consequence of what is happening as of now. I'm not sure that we are going to see a massive flow in favor of China just yet. I think dollar futures, as far as petrodollar that we call it is, I think it is intact. All the prices in the world are determined in US dollars. I think more than 95% of transactions are in US. So I'm not sure this is going to shift. If there is a shift, you have said something, we will strengthen the Chinese economy. But horror upon horror, can we support the American economy? So I don't think that is the case. the Americans will retain control over the global flows in terms of their dollar. You have read about their literature and it comes from there that whenever they have serious, they actually print dollars whenever it suits them and use it for global currency. And all the tyrants in the world keep their ill-gotten gains in US dollars. So I think dollar is alive and safe, alive and kicking for some time to come. You asked about transition. You see, UAE is a unique country. It has 9 million people, of whom 10% are Emiratis, so 900,000 Emiratis. It's a maverick country. They do things. They have the world's third largest, they have a third largest re-export port. They have the second largest storage facility at Fujairah, oil storage facility, world's largest aircraft, world's best airport, world's highest building. You guys go on. So they want to be at the cutting edge. So what is the buzzword these days? Energy transition. UAE has to be there. It's not significant. UAE has oil at present production for 100 years. Their oil production began only in the 60s. So they have a lot of oil available to them. Nothing to worry about. All of us know that the fossil fuels is going to be around till 2050. I don't want to go beyond that because I don't know what's going to happen after that. But whatever I have read, these are not my concoction. This is what has been published. 2050 तक तो निकल ही जाए. उसके बाद अल्लाह मालिक है. देखेंगे क्या होता है. उसके बाद I don't think we should. UAE does everything. It's a major supplier of oil in the world, and it's always looking for new markets. It is investing a lot in potential part in our own country. ADNOC has invested in our refineries. So UAE has imagined itself the capacity to be a maverick. And it does. It's a good thing. Give jobs to our people. 3 million Indians happy. So I don't think we should worry there. I was not able to see the link between the high prices that Indians pay at the petrol pump and our security concerns vis-a-vis the infrastructure. Let me clarify as I have understood the situation. The high price at the petrol pump is a crucial requirement for India's budget. Who are the ones who buy that petrol at the petrol pump? Firstly, people who own a car. So middle class, upper middle class and upper class. They can afford to pay this price. Has anyone reduced the use of the car because the price may? Objectively, government has assessed that there is no impact on demand. Demand is, if economic theory says demand is called, demand is inelastic. Demand is not elastic. It is inelastic. I think that is the case. What about the others? The others are government vehicles. Nothing to worry about. Government pays, government gets back. Third are commercial vehicles. Commercial vehicles include the cost of production, cost of transportation. I am not sure that this bothers anybody, and it's important for government. You can't afford, at a time of economic crisis, you can't afford to reduce prices. There is no constituency that is going to turn against you. After all, we are subsidizing gas cylinder and kerosene and diesel, which is used by common people. The diesel is used to adulterate the petrol, as you know, so it's a good subsidy. So this is not.
Okay, about Sri Lanka.
Yeah, but now you're talking about infrastructure. I have not seen any reduction in our capacity to put up infrastructure that is. It's a separate thing. Government has clear, firstly, public sector has very clear plans, forward plans about what they need to do. New refineries already announced, new projects already announced. So they are going on stream. They may not go as fast as we may say. We say 2 years, it takes 5 years, but they do come up at some point. And sometimes vested interests come. Terminal हम बनाना चाह रहे हैं चेन्नई में, वो farmers are agitated. They are told कि इनको मत देना, अपना price बढ़ा दो. So that project should have taken 2 years to 10 years, but फिर बन गया. So that is what all infrastructure finally comes up. It's not linked with these prices. Now, private sector is having the best time in the world. They are the ones who everything is going well for them. They get all the money from our banks. There is no dearth of currency available for their project, and they are able to do extremely well. So I think that there is no problem that I can see, and nor do I see anything. Yes, your question is well taken, and this has been raised. Why did India tell the Americans to bugger off when it came to supplies from Russia, but we didn't do it with regard to Iran? If I recall correctly, India has never stood up to the Americans with regard to Iran. We had in 2003 the visit of Khatami, where we had a New Delhi Declaration, where we agreed on very substantial strategic partnership, which would have components relating to defense cooperation, intelligence cooperation, security cooperation, economic cooperation. They offered us Chabahar at that time. The development of Chabahar, the connectivity from Chabahar to Afghanistan, Central Asia, and to Moscow. This was offered in 2003. And we truly believe this is serving our strategic interest, because this is what has been the Indian complaint up to now. Yeah, but we don't have direct access to Central Asia. We don't have direct access to Afghanistan. And if we were to have access to Moscow through the land route, it would cut off this whole tour we have to do through the Suez Canal, Mediterranean, and then go into the north, into the ports that Russia has. So this was considered truly crucial for India's interest. Yet within 1 year it was over. 2004, Manmohan Singh government came in, started negotiating with Bush on the nuclear agreement. And the Americans made it very clear from that Iran is a no-go area. The feelings in the United States about Iran are crucial. And the message given to India was at that time very clear. You want the nuclear agreement, you tell the Iranians to go on. What did we do? We sacrificed crucial national interest at that time. Did any Indian ever tell the Americans this is not acceptable to us? You have problems with Iran, we don't. And your problems are domestic in character. We don't see any threat to us, to our security. This was never conveyed. It was taken for granted that we need to work with the Americans, even if it means sacrificing India's crucial security and strategic interests. I then raise a question with all of you. 2003, we were offered all these projects. 10 years later, Xi Jinping talks of Phobos. And 2014, he talks about the maritime route, which later becomes Belt and Road. 10 years after the offer to us to have the south-north connectivity projects, we don't do anything at all. Blank slate. Look at the map. No lines. The Chinese come up with the east-west connectivity, and we scream blue murder, geopolitical agenda, etc. Who stopped you? If we had done those projects, the Chinese would have negotiated with us for coordination between north-south connectivity and east-west connectivity. My point is, and I have said this 1,000 times, you don't do anything that serves your interest. It's always somebody else's fault. Why? If it is your crucial national interest, you should have the capacity to tell the Americans, I'm sorry, this is important for me. And if you are my partner and you want to have long-term relations with us, it has to be a relationship based on mutual respect. Come to the second part. After the JCPOA is signed, we once again revived Chabahar. Once again, now this time Prime Minister Modi went there. Some of you will remember that he's sitting in the middle and he's sitting with the President Rouhani, and he has got this Afghan President Ashraf Ghani, and he's sitting tripartite. Chabahar, as if it started then. It started in 2003. Chabahar shuru hoga, and we will have connectivity to Afghanistan and to Central Asia and to Moscow. Trump comes in a year later. Did anybody in India tell Trump? And Trump is not the most sane or stable person in the world, as we know now every day. No Indian told him that, look, this is not in our interest. These are crucial interests are right here. You have a domestic agenda vis-a-vis Iran. We don't. None of that happened. Russia was different because Russia offered us a discount of $20. So That is what we took advantage of. No country in the world is going to say no to $20 discount. China also bought a lot and so did we. We filled our everything that you could fill up, every storage tank, every terminal, everything we have filled up thoroughly, and we are very well. It's all very well. So that with regard to Iran, the politics was fundamentally different. Also, you can see that the government saw no threat from Biden. It may be their sense, I don't know, I don't want to elaborate further because that is not that's not part of my knowledge here. But I do feel that this is the Iran thing we succumbed. Where Russia is concerned, we made it. But you remember the pressure that was mounted upon India. But they backed off. Maybe if we had done the same thing with the Iranians, we might have had the same result. Isn't it? भाई हिम्मत दिखाओ तो सही ना उसके बाद we have to live with the consequences. तुम कुछ करते ही नहीं लेटे हुए रहते हो और कहते हो कि सब it's the fault of everybody else. This is what I have to say. You did what you had to do. What did the American not do? They sent an idiot called Dalip Singh, Indian origin chap, US passport holder. He stands next to my foreign secretary, puts his arm around him and threatens India. There will be consequences. I attacked him very harshly in an interview. I said, you look up at her. Humko consequences suna hai. Our own origin chap. Because of that, he has got access. He is Deputy National Security Advisor. He threatened us. Okay. Another fellow came. They threatened us on human rights, religious freedom. If you remember, Blinken, External Affairs Minister standing next to Blinken. Blinken says that we have got these reports about religious absence of religious freedom and human rights. External Affairs Minister did not reply to him then. He replied to him next day from the Indian Embassy. So what he said did not appear in the US media, it appeared in the Indian media. We should reply to them in front of them. You can't have it like this. If Blinken has said something to the US media, you are standing next to him, give him a reply. And don't just get a captive audience sitting in the Indian Embassy. So this is the thing. This is my view. I have the privilege of not being in service for 11 years, and therefore I can hold these positions. But then I'm very clear. I have been tested in my time. When the American once told me that why are you not condemning the Iranians when I'm in service? I was a joint secretary. That why are you not condemning the Iranians on their nuclear program? I said, nobody believes that they have a nuclear program. And they don't trust you one bit. You allowed Pakistan to have a nuclear weapons program. You allowed Israel and you allowed apartheid South Africa in violation of the NPT. That is your credibility with us. We have no credibility. So I think that is the way we are. Very clear. I'm fine.
Is there any other
I
question?
have nothing else to do.
Is there any question online, Shraddha?
Anyone has any queries, any questions?
Because here only Satish only has one question, that's it. So in case if there is any question online, you can tell.
No, not as
That
of
is
now.
in that point.
Okay, two questions. Harish also has a question. Okay, then these two are the final questions that we're going to take. One by Satish and another one by Harish. If there is no question online. Okay. So, okay, Satish.
Sir, as you mentioned, and we all have witnessed that oil and gas always has been used as a tool of geopolitics and to serve the interest of selective interest of foreign policy. So, on the same line, do you think that Europeans and Americans are pushing us and all the developing country for though the climate change is a real problem, but in the name of climate change and green energy transition, they are pushing putting the owners of this climate change reforms to serve their own interest of either economic interest in the name of investment, because they are not they are not willing to share the technology and when it's come to transferring technology, but they
This
are
technology. Green.
all the technology
That's a
which are
general.
associated with the green transition.
With transition, who is not willing to share this?
European and
Europeans.
Americans, they are interested in investment, but when it comes to CO2, means transfer of technology, So on that front, they are not so friendly. So can we say that or are you able to think that they are on the same line? They are using the a kind of geopolitical tools when it comes to transition of energy transition.
Sir, you mentioned that West Asia is a churning region. So there was a statement a few days back by our foreign minister that Europe's problems is not world's problem. So do you think so?
Sorry,
Uh,
who said, which foreign minister said?
Jaishankar, I'm referring to External Affairs Minister, that Europe's problems is not world's problem. So do you think
Whose
sir,
problems are not world's problems? Problems are not.
Yes, problems.
Mr. Jaishankar said that.
Yes. So, sir, my question is, do you think that due to this war, there will be more kind of alliances in West Asia and in the Asian region as a whole because of this energy crisis that the Asian region itself will face?
Oil and gas is a strategic asset, as you know, because it is crucial for the well-being of the nation and for the effectiveness of the armed forces. It's a crucial asset and it has therefore strategic value. It has had since the beginning of the century. It played a very major role in the First World War and the Second World War. And the reason the Americans have such a strong presence in West Asia is overwhelmingly due to oil and gas, particularly oil. Not that the Americans need West Asian oil, but their other allies do. And the other thing is they would not want this oil to fall into, they wouldn't like it to fall into unfriendly hands. One of the reasons why the Americans had necessarily to attack Iraq and vacate the occupation of Kuwait is because with that occupation, Iraq controlled 25% of world's oil, 15% Iraqi and 10% Kuwait. So that was a factor in leading to the conflict. So with regard to Europe, my own sense is that the sanctions that have emerged have been largely the result of US initiative. The Europeans have gone along with it. There's no doubt about it. The Americans announced it in May and the Europeans started implementing it, announced it in March, and the Europeans started implementing them in May. As of now, there is solidarity, Western solidarity on the same side, and to put pressure on Russia. Ironically, Russia's assets have increased. It's not, I don't know what pressure on Russia. Russia is happily selling its oil, most of the oil that it has. At some stage, it may start feeling the crunch. It's possible. We don't know. But as of now, it's been okay. It has not had any effect on the movement of the war. The war situation has continued as lethal as it was before. I'm not therefore able to see where the Europeans have benefited just yet in terms of energy. With regard to green transition, I'm not sure there has been any technology denial that I'm aware of. It's not my subject. There are far better qualified people who know more about energy transition than I do. But I am not aware that the Europeans have held back technology. On the other hand, you may remember that just now when we had the Glasgow summit on clean energy, the Americans said that they are looking at a fund for $1 trillion fund annually to fund this transition. So I have not seen that the Western nations are holding back on transition. What is happening is not connected with holding back or connected with it being a strategic asset. It is that the policies are not developed in Brussels, they are being developed in Washington. Left to themselves, I'm not sure with what alacrity the Europeans would have wanted to go for these kind of energy sanctions. As far as the United States is concerned, very happily went because they are not dependent on this. So it's a little, and there were no consultations. This is the main point, that it was a unilateral. On 24th February, war begins, 8th March, Biden announces the sanctions. It came as a shock in Paris and Brussels. Also, I want to remind you, Macron had started talking. The way he was speaking he was talking about an independent European posture. He also talked to you, met Putin. Putin made him sit very far away. You saw that picture. He met Putin. And it appeared as if he wanted to develop a separate European initiative to engage with Russia. That was stymied immediately, and the Americans told him to sit at home and shut up. So that has not been picked up. My sense now, I have told the people I have spoken to, my colleagues, my students here, that this business of the long term is a very dangerous business. What is the long term? Short term, medium term, and long term. Very often, I was going to say, and then I bit my tongue. I was going to say in the long term, the Europeans will be free. But then I thought to myself, I'm contradicting my own posture. Because what is the long term? I have said, and I stand by that, the long term should not be more than 5 years. People like me should not talk about a long term beyond 5 years. Short term, 1 year, medium term, 2 to 3 years, long term, 5 years. So that is something I can be held responsible. If I say यार 20 साल में ये होने वाला है तो आप कहेंगे यार ये तो लेट जाएगा जाके इसको क्या कर we don't be held responsible. No, I don't want. This is not helpful. The long term is determined by the next 5. First, next 5 years. After that, the next 5 years will be shaped. After that, the next 5. So I am comfortable with the 5-year scenario. In the 5-year scenario, I am not able to see a possible independent European strategic posture in a 5-year term. Could it be longer? Possibly, based on my understanding of Germany. Because Germany of 1939, 45 and Germany of today is quite different. The population has changed and it is much less motivated, much less disciplined, much less Germanic, and that left, right, they used to do and put their hand up in a certain. So if that is, but I am still watching the VR. Maybe you don't need to do so much left, right if your technology enables you to build certain capacities which are lethal. So that is where they will. And I know that Germany throughout the Cold War wanted to engage with Russia. That has been there. But they're like, no. The last thing, if there's any Russian ire, it will be directed at them. So I think that there will be, but I would not like to assert it in an academic paper because it will be violating my own 5-year rule. Japan, my friends tell me, who know Japan better than I do, that Japan is too insecure vis-a-vis China and therefore too dependent on the Americans to build an independent strategic posture. Germany could and will, but not Japan. This is my friend's tale. I think we will have to leave it at that. And we.
Shraddha ma'am, is there any question online?
Yes. There is one question, but I see Hari here. So Hari, would you like to ask yourself rather than me reading the question?
Am I audible?
You are.
Good evening, sir. This is Hari. So I have a doubt that what can we learn from the Nord Stream gas pipeline leak and how can we apply those inputs to save our critical infrastructure, which is inside India, especially the gas pipeline, as well as outside India? Thank you.
The lesson I learned even before Nord Stream is this. Pipelines are too loaded with politics for them to be viable. Even, for example, the Americans pushed the Baku-Tbilisi-Jehan pipeline. They wanted to have a pipeline in Europe that was not part of the Russian grid. So they pushed very hard for an alternative pipeline that would come from Azerbaijan, from Baku, Tbilisi. So it went to Georgia and then came to Turkey and opened at Jehan. It took 10 years for this project to come up. It is functioning reasonably well. But Azerbaijan does not have the oil to support this pipeline. It's a, by the way, $7-8 billion pipeline. Doesn't have it has to buy oil from other sources to feed into the pipeline. So if a pipeline is set up with political considerations as the primary interest, it is likely to have very serious consequences. It doesn't work. Pipeline should be pursued for energy security rather than politics. Having said this, I do not know of any pipeline that is not influenced by politics. Because the moment 2 or more countries are involved in it, even when the Baku-Tbilisi-Ceyhan pipeline was going through, the pipeline could have easily gone through Armenia and then come into Turkey. But they did a long detour through Georgia because Turkey has issues with Armenia. When we went to visit, Mr. Ayer and I went to visit this pipeline as a model for us, for Iran-Pakistan-India pipeline, we had a very detailed presentation on this. This is an oil pipeline. We were looking at a gas pipeline. But they told us about the security measures, how the monitoring was done from space. Then you have a joint control room of all the countries in one control room, etc. We were quite impressed with all these. We didn't know. But with regard to Iran, Pakistan, India, for example, I can't see that coming through. I mean, the scenario doesn't admit. You have the problem of Iran with these American sanctions. Then you have this Pakistan problem. So Pakistan will always be a problem as far as India is. I therefore simply say this, that we have to go for LNG. LNG today, many years ago, when we started negotiating these pipelines, LNG became economical compared to a pipeline after 4,500 kilometers. That is, if your ship was going around and if your pipeline was 4,500, then LNG was cheaper. Now it is 1,500. 1,500 kilometers of pipeline and LNG. So I feel the future is with LNG. As far as India is concerned, we have LNG terminals all over. Gujarat itself has 2 of them. Plus, we have got on the west coast and the east coast. So we are well equipped. We don't have to spend more money anymore. Long ago, 10 years ago, an LNG terminal used to cost $1 billion. Instead, 2 or 3 years to be constructed. And in India, it's a nightmare because behind the LNG terminal, you have all these facilities. Acquisition of land is a nightmare. I was involved with one small part. They said that in Chennai, where LNG terminal is coming up, they showed me a huge map and they showed the pockets of the farmers who own different plots of land. Most of it had to come, but about a fourth had not. Project Rukia. In India, the problem is this, but we have most of the terminals are now there in place. So this is the lesson I have learned already from Indian sources. I don't need the example of Nord Stream. In regard to Nord Stream, it is crucial for Europe. Nord Stream is part of a huge network of pipelines that go from Siberia into Western Europe. At the time of when the Cold War ended in 1990, you had European dependence on Russia to the extent of 50%. Now it is 40%. 2019 for 2021 figures are 40%. So there is a very heavy dependence on the Russian network, and it can't be done away with. But that is already in place. And the Russian network was constructed at the peak of the Cold War, in the face of Russian opposition. At that time, the Europeans knew that their energy interest is more important than America's Cold War interest, and they did the pipelines. America put sanctions, on the Europeans while these pipelines were being constructed. I think that is what. So the other lesson to be learned is when Germany is concerned and other Europeans, you still need to work with these Russians.
Thank you, sir. We have among us Mr. Devender Sharma, who is the member of National Security Advisory Board. So Is there, like, would you like to share your thought? Um,
Well, I would not prepared. I was just thinking I'll be a good listener, but I joined and just to listen to the ideas of other members. But let me share some of the thoughts. See, like when it comes to energy transition, just I don't know whether why it's not working. Okay, okay, yes. When it comes to energy transition, what is important for this country is to make use of the renewable energy. See, we are heavily dependent on the fossil fuel, and the fossil fuel and the import of crude oil, which is to the tune of 80 to 85% from the other countries, is something which is a huge drain on our foreign exchange, foreign reserves, and about we import varying from depending on the cost of the crude oil, about 112 billion US dollars to 160 billion US dollars each year of the crude oil. Now, to come out of this dependence on the crude oil, what is important is we need to work on renewable energy. See, for the entire world, we have set an example. Example in this particular case is that we are the one who produce the least cost of the solar energy. 2 rupee, 1 rupee 99 paisa or 2 rupee per paisa. Now with the change in the rates, maybe it will go to something like 2 rupee 25 paisa or of that order. About 10% increase would be there. Still with this cost, it is the cheapest, one of the cheapest in the entire world. And we have adequate space where we can put this renewable energy sources. Now the question is, renewable energy, everybody says, is available, especially the solar is available during daytime, and wind is also depending on the pressure difference. Wind is also intermittent. But during night, wind is available, during daytime, we have the solar. Now, what is important in this particular case is that we should have facilities to utilize this solar. And as you know, the Prime Minister during COP26 in Glasgow committed that by 2030 we will have 50% of our energy from renewable. We will use 50% of our energy from renewable sources. So for that, important issue over here is that we need to, as on date, we are 405 gigawatt of installed capacity in this country when it comes to the energy. And fortunately, the good point is now we are 100% electrified, and electrification is throughout the country. Every nook and corner of the country is electrified. Now, in order to stick to the commitment of something like 500 gigawatt of non-fossil fuel of energy, we need to add around 365 gigawatt of renewable energy, non-fossil fuel of energy, which will account for hydro, solar, wind, and all form of renewable energy, small hydro as well. In order to balance this energy, we need to have the base load, and so that the grid stability is also there. To account for the grid stability, we need to add another about 60 gigawatt by 2030 of the base load, or maybe it would be either nuclear, pump storage, or thermal. We can't escape the thermal. Many people, I work very extensively on climate change. So when I will say thermal, many people will not like my statement because we are adding to the pollution again. But the truth is we need to have balancing of the grid also. So by adding this 365 gigawatt of our renewable energy, what is important is we need to work on its conversion to storage form of energy. And what is storage form of energy? India is doing very well, I must say. And like if you look at Adani, Ambani's, they have been talking of the hydrogen production of hydrogen. And hydrogen, they say they would produce in, at one point of time, Mukesh Ambani made a statement, it is possible to produce hydrogen less than $1 per kilogram, which to some extent maybe slightly difficult, I would think. But in case we can still do it up to $1.5 per kilo of hydrogen we can produce, it would be a win-win situation. You see, it would be a game changer for the entire country. Now, see, like see, I have a role of the regulator also, being chairman of regulatory commission. See, my colleagues have different opinion. They say when we produce hydrogen, we have about 50% of the efficiency losses. I would agree that there are efficiency losses, but this 2 rupee 20 paisa per unit of power will get translated when we produce hydrogen. It will get translated to something like 5 rupees a unit. I don't mind. Even if it is a 40% efficiency, it will be of the order of 5 rupees. 40-45% of efficiency conversion efficiency, about 5 rupees a unit. So if I get a additional base load, please understand, of 5 rupees a unit, it is a great achievement for me, because all the fertilizers, all chemical industries, all process industries, I would be running at that level, which is see, like we immediately, as on date, what is happening is I personally experienced, because I was supplying power to, during my earlier assignment as chairman of Bhakra Vyas Management Board, I was supplying power to Nangal Fertilizer Factory. And they used to have shut down, and the Nangal fertilizer plant was running into loss continuously. So once I met the general manager of that factory, called him, asked him how can I help him. He was really amused that I'm asking him rather than he coming to me. I asked him that, tell me how, as a chairman of Bhakra Vyas, I can help him. He said, sir, he needs uninterrupted power. I made some changes into the system and we assured him uninterrupted power. And that year, for the first time, this plant came out of the red and it made profit. So what is important is, if we use hydrogen for process industry like fertilizer, chemicals, cement plants, our exports are going to increase manifold. And that is what is important. We will have net importer of from net importer of fertilizers, from net importer of chemicals, we will become a net exporter of all these things, all these chemicals and fertilizers. And for instance, the other process industries like paper mills are also process industries. So with that, what is important is we need to have a focused approach, and somehow this $160 billion of crude import, it will take few years for us to come out of that dependence on the crude, but we need to come out of it. And there are other people, many people who keep on saying that hydrogen is a bomb. You see, like we make such statements and derail our own system, because we are free to make any statement and everybody is expert. That's unfortunate part. We have many journalists in this country. They keep on making some statements. They think they know all, but they don't know, unfortunately. And they make some statements, and those statements are taken very seriously by the people. And now what is happening is that once some very senior people say use of hydrogen is a potential bomb. See, we will derail our entire hydrogen program. And hydrogen we can use for heavy transport, we can use for aviation sector, apart from the other sectors, fertilizers and chemicals, what I have already mentioned. And see, for the light vehicles, we are already banking upon the EVs. EVs also are, it's not that easy process. What we are trying to come out with, the people say that if you have an EV, then with one charge, with 1 unit charge, it runs for so many kilometers, and we should increase the rate of electricity. But we again try to provide the cheaper rates for electric vehicles, for charging of electric vehicles, so that these electric vehicle charging is done and we can promote as a nation the electric vehicles. Once we have electric vehicles for light transport, for the cars and other transport, for heavy transport, hydrogen, for aviation, hydrogen, then we come out of this crude oil economy, and that is important. We at the same time, I would agree with it. We have the problems in Ukraine. We have problems with the West trying to like impose their ideas on us, like not sanctions so far, but they are trying to tell us do this, do this. We are fortunately for us, we have a very strong government which is not listening to them. And at the moment, what is happening is that if we somehow work on our program with utmost sincerity, achieve these goals of non-fossil fuel of 500 gigawatt by 2030, work on grid stability, and then produce hydrogen less than $1.5 per kilogram. It would be a win-win situation, and the country entire energy transition scenario is going to change. That's what I have to say. Thank you. Thanks for listening. In fact, I just joined and I thought I'll just listen to all of you because I was doing something else as well. Thank you so much. Thanks for giving me an opportunity to just speak to all of you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir, and thank you for sharing your insights. And although we would love to interact more with you, but since we are running short on time, so sir, but we will definitely get back to you, and we would really want you to enrich us. So I'm so sorry for the first just introducing you, and it was a short notice, sir. So thank you, everyone. Thank you, sir, Ambassador, and also the audience. Now, I would quickly like my colleague Devender to please extend vote of thanks. Thank you. Devender, yeah.
Thank you, sir, for the wonderful presentation. Sir, it's an honor and privilege for me to present and deliver this vote of thanks, especially when the lecture is given by you. Because I met sir in the morning and I was telling sir that, sir, back in 2016, I had the opportunity to attend one of the lectures by sir. And sir had delivered a talk on political Islam and global jihad. And it was so interesting that I became so curious. For the next 5 to 7 years, I got stuck with the West Asia. And today is the day I gave a copy of my book to sir. So thank you so much, sir, for being a source of influence for me. Sir is the renowned expert on international affairs, and sir has written many books. Sir, it's an honor for us to have you on the Lavad confab on national security. And thank you very much, sir, for a very thought-provoking discussion on the Ukraine-Russia crisis and its implication on India's energy security, which not only provided us the insights of the issue, but it also gave a perspective how we should actually approach this issue, which was missing, and which also brings us to many of the points which were asked by our students also, because when the issue erupted, many of the fingers were directed towards us because of our energy imports from Russia, and because there was Europe and other Western countries expected us to curtail our imports from Russia, and that's how our foreign external affairs minister showed to the world the India way, through which we highlighted that for us our national interest matters more, right? And that brings us to the Harish point, and which was shown by our external affairs minister, that Europe also needs to grow out of the mentality that they consider that they consider that they have to come out that Europe problems are world's problem. They consider this and world's problem, and Europe problems are world problem, and world's problems are not Europe's problem. So that was the point that was made by him, which primarily highlighting the India way under the dynamic leadership of Prime Minister Modi, that no matter what, whatever pressure the world community will be putting on us, for us, our security and our energy consideration will be met in accordance with our national interest. And so thank you so much, sir, again for the very interactive session and the way the students have asked question and everything. So we would also like to have more discussions like this in future. And through this platform, I would also like to thank the Ministry of Home Affairs and Ministry of External Affairs for supporting us in this initiative. And also thanks to our Vice Chancellor, sir, and our director, sir, for being backbone for all the initiatives that we do in the school. And thanks to all the colleagues and our students for joining us for this discussion. So thank you, sir.
In particular, we'd like to thank Devendra Sharma, sir, for joining us. Thank you very much, sir. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. This is one question.